Alright, all you glorious gamers out there, welcome to the PlayerStoo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayerStoo on all the social media, that's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayerStoo.com, that's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, that really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, that just helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. You're an absolute legend to us. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
Going very well, Mark. Good to see you as ever. I've just been sat here all night wondering when a billionaire with more money than sense is going to come along and buy us. Set us free.
Elon, if you're listening, I'm open to offers. Lewis, I don't think I could possibly get into a discussion about the complexities of Elon Musk. So, what video games have you been playing this week?
Yeah, let's not go to that dark place. Instead, I've been back to Elden Ring, as you well know. I've been progressing my playthrough of that a bit further. I'm in some pretty exciting territory, but I guess the real exciting territory this week, Mark, is that you have been playing Elden Ring.
Lewis, I have started playing Elden Ring, and I've got to say, despite hearing all the good reports and hearing how much everyone loved this game, right, I'm still taken aback by just how fucking incredible the open world is.
Good.
Really is a quite astonishing world that they've created at From Software. Jesus Christ, it genuinely feels as though this is the next yardstick. And I've barely scratched the surface. And I already feel that. I'm like, they've just nailed it. They've just absolutely nailed this. I mean, honestly, we'll see what Breath of the Wild 2 does early next year, but I really can't help but think, this is the standard to which all other open world games will now be measured again. Do you know what I mean? I will say, as a sort of criticism is a very harsh word, but I'm struggling a little bit with the combat just now. I have to say, coming from Bloodborne, coming from the Demon's Souls remake, I've not massively been enamoured with the combat so far. Now, maybe that's just the weapons I've found or whatever, or maybe that's just the starting class I've chosen. Obviously, I'm very early in the game. I know that sort of bows are a big part of the game and the magic is a big part of the game, and my class doesn't really have either of them yet. I don't have any projectile weapons at all. I don't know if that was a bad move. That will remain to be seen for me. I will say that the combat has maybe not been my favourite so far. Very much my favourite part of it has just been literally wandering about. Has been incredible.
Yeah, I mean, that early doors exploration that you get started with, it can be overwhelming, I found it in certain ways, but it's really exciting when you first emerge out into the game proper, when you open that big door and you're suddenly out in Limgrave. It really is quite an astonishing moment, and as you spin the camera around and sort of see what you're looking at, you just know what a treat you're in for. And I know from the wee bits that you've already told me that you've been finding some of those kind of really exciting early game secrets and moments, and the encounter with the dragon that I had right at the start, I think you had similarly.
Yeah.
It's clearly a set piece that they know is going to happen early.
That was very cool. The
same with the sentinel that kind of attacks you more or less as soon as you start the game. It feels like a lot of those things are put there, not just in the first few hours, but in the first few minutes to make you go Jesus Christ, what am I in for here? And I totally echo what you're saying about the combat. I've been really curious to hear what you would say about that, because if you go back and listen to the first episode eons ago when I started playing Elden Ring, I was a bit concerned that coming off of Bloodborne, the combat felt too different. I would say that I've got used to it now, and actually the most recent PlayStation that I've had, I was flying through it, not slaughtering all enemies in my path, but suddenly finding that groove and not being worried about approaching a large encampment of people. In terms of your projectiles and stuff like that, I had a magic staff to begin with, just with the character class that I picked, but I didn't find a bow for hours. I found loads of arrows.
Oh man, I'm inundated with arrows. See, whenever I do get a bow, I am so well equipped, but I do not have a bow.
It's not spoilery, there's nothing spoilery. it's just like you'll get one either off an enemy or just on a random, you'll find it around the map at some point. But I've not used that very much either. I've definitely leaned into melee gameplay with a bit of magic. I partly picked a class with decent magic stats to begin with because there was none of that in Bloodborne, and I wanted to kind of get a feel of it. So if you can, it depends obviously what your various like faith and intellect stats are, but if you can get
bad stance,
yeah, might be. If you can be bothered putting some early game points into that, then fair enough. I would say though, with the leveling, I mean, I've hit a point already where I need sort of 9,000, 10,000 runes to level up, and I don't feel like any of my stats are that high yet. So there's obviously more options in this game than there were in Bloodborne in terms of where to put your stats. So you need to be slightly careful, but there's an option there for it. If you can be bothered to try to build out that way.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's the thing about FromSoft games. I think that's why a lot of people love them, is that you can build your character how you want to build your character, right? You find the weapons that suit you, and eventually something clicks. It always happens. It always happens with the FromSoft games. It happened with me with Bloodborne after the fucking 5th time of trying or whatever it was. Suddenly just everything is flowing. Similar thing happened to me with the Demon's Souls remake, and I'm sure that Elden Ring will be no different. I am struggling with the combat a little bit just now, just in terms of timing, and also healing is just so different in this as well, and that it just feels very slow. It feels slow to heal, whereas Bloodborne specifically was very quick. Demon's Souls was probably more in line with this, to be honest, but it still didn't feel as slow. It feels very slow to heal, and I don't know if there's a point to that, but it's not something that is particularly rubbing me the right way right now. However, this is all very minor criticism. I can't help but stress it is a fucking fantastic game. Holy shit, that world is incredible. I'm very, very, very much looking forward to getting stuck into it for 40 or 50 more hours, Liz.
I think it'll be more than that, man.
It very well could be.
I'm on about 35 hours now with the progress I was putting in over the last day or two, and at about the 30-hour mark, I had a moment that felt a bit like the title bump, where you are suddenly looking out over a landscape and thinking, how on earth is there this much still ahead of me? And I've barely scratched the surface as well, so it is enormous. The height and depth of it all is just staggering, quite frankly. I would say, we've talked around this a wee bit, but for anyone who isn't sure about Souls games or doesn't feel like they've got the time and all that, I still think if you're interested in open world games, I just couldn't help get excited about the way people are talking about this, and if you're that kind of person, it is worth giving it a shot, even if you will fall off it. Borrow it off someone if you need to, just to see a bit of the world. You don't have to get good, you don't have to beat it. Just experiencing it for a little bit and seeing what From Software have built here, I think, is a really exciting thing. And I've only just now as well kind of got a proper lore dump from the area that I'm in. I won't spoil anything for you, and it's just, that's 30 hours in and you're still getting taught stuff. I mean, you're still being introduced to the kind of basic premise of what's going on even, so it's just absolutely colossal. I'm not going to be able to play for about another week at the moment because I'm having to put my TV in to get repaired, and then I'm going away for a few days, so I'm horrified and terrified that you might just put the burners on and catch up with me a bit over the next couple of days.
I don't think so, man. I've got a busy weekend myself. I'll be lucky to put in another 2 or 3 hours.
Good.
Alright, Lewis, I think it's time for the news. Alright, Lewis, news item number 1. We have more information on PlayStation's revamped PS Plus subscription. Firstly, we've got some launch dates, Lewis. In Asian markets, it will be coming out on May the 23rd. In Japan, it will be coming out on June the 1st. In the Americas, it will be coming out on June the 13th. And here in Europe, Lewis, it will be coming out on June the 22nd, which is all relatively soon, I would say, which is pretty exciting. Secondly, 4 classic Siphon Filter games have been rated in Korea for the PS4 and the PS5, which is almost certainly going to be part of these 340 classic games that PlayStation will be providing at the PS Platinum tier. Thirdly, PlayStation have confirmed that the update process will be very straightforward, which I'm sure everyone will be glad to hear. Basically, all you need to do is pay the difference between whatever tier you're currently on if you choose to upgrade, and it will also be adjusted for the amount of time that's left on your subscription, which is very good and exactly how it should work, which is great and sort of rare for PlayStation. So, thumbs up there.
Well, don't count your chickens yet, Mark.
well, that is true. But Lewis, probably the biggest piece of news around the promised trials of the Platinum tier, which are basically demos really, aren't they? According to GameDeveloper.com, which used to be called GammaSutra.com, which I didn't realise, Timed trials are now a requirement for all games that will be $34 or higher. This has apparently come to developers through Sony's developer portal, but many developers have claimed that they had no prior communication regarding this change. It is unclear whether or not this applies to all publishers that are making games $34 or above, because obviously that would include all of the big publishers, and they must have had communication on it. They absolutely must have. The trials themselves, Lewis, will be 2 hours long. Devs will not have to retroactively make trials for games that already exist, but trials will have to be provided for new games that are made. The trial will have to come out 3 months from the launch of the game. So when the game launches, the developers will have 3 months to put the trial in place, and then when it is in place, it will have to last for a year. Sony have said that they are open to releasing custom game demos rather than the 2-hour trial of the game, because obviously the 2-hour trial just gives you the beginning bit of the game, which might not necessarily be hugely indicative in the first 2 hours of how the game is going to be. So developers might want to do something a bit more creative and give you a sort of vertical slice of just an exciting part of the game. But Sony said that they would approve that on a case-by-case basis. Developers will also be able to provide free weekends and trials, even custom demos, as they ever have been able to all PlayStation users, should they choose to. But if you are a $34 or above game, you will have to provide a 2-hour trial for your game, it sounds like. Lewis, I think that this is actually good. We are big fans of demos here, I think it is safe to say. I think that this will be good for the consumer. But Lewis, they've rolled this out in the most PlayStation way possible, e.g. they've not told anyone about it until what feels like far too late in the day. I do not understand why they did not communicate this better to devs. I think that this could be a real problem potentially for small developers, particularly if their game was going to be coming in round about that $34 price point. You know what I mean? Suddenly they have to make a decision. Is it worth us going for the price point that we wanted to have and putting in extra development time to do whatever they have to do to get this 2-hour trial ready? Or are we just going to put our game out at $33.99 so that we don't have to bother? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's quite a bizarre situation for a dev to find themselves all of a sudden being told this at the last minute. I mean, I think you said there that this rollout is starting in the Asian markets basically a month from now, so...
Yeah, it's way too late.
Yeah, it's not very much time. I mean, I suppose they might just phase that in a bit and say, you know, game trials won't be available for all games right from the off, because if your game was due to come out in June, you're really a bit fucked all of a sudden. We don't have a lot of clarity about all of this because, is it all games from all devs, or is it mainly going to be focused on PlayStation first party games, that kind of thing? It's obviously got to still be connected to whatever games they're actually offering through this subscription system, and it's not just literally every single game that's over $34 suddenly has to provide a game trial.
No, I think it is that was my understanding anyway. If you're on the PlayStation Store and you're over $34, you have to provide the 2-hour game trial.
But only for people who have got the subscription, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So I was clarifying that in my own head as well, to be honest, because I was thinking before, like, that surely can't be it, but then I suppose it must be, but then how can they enforce that? I mean, if you don't have that ready within 3 months of launch, are they going to kick your game off of the store? I mean, that's just...
I have absolutely no idea.
All of that's to be kind of explored and probably decided to a certain extent by PlayStation going forward, but I just worry a little bit as well that it might lead to some, if it is connected to whatever games they want to make available on the system as well, like, will that prevent some games from being able to go forward with it? Because if you are a mid-tier developer, the games that I think have been mentioned most are games of the level of like Kena, Bridge of Spirits and A Plague Tale Innocence, and those studios aren't really big enough to drop everything and suddenly build out a demo or carve out the first 2 hours of the game in a way that, you know, a player could kind of meaningfully understand. But obviously from the consumer side, it's great. It'll be fantastic to have access to these things, so I hope it works out for all involved. It feels like maybe we're getting a bit of a better deal than some of the people actually making the games though. Yeah,
it does. I've got to say, like, I think that we're both in favour of demos. I think that these game trials are great. It's slightly annoying that they are locked behind the most expensive tier of this PlayStation Plus service. However, I do think it is a good thing for the consumer. I do wish that they'd communicated this better to the devs, but I'm hoping ultimately it all turns out good and endless. Alright, news item number 2. A few interesting pieces of information have come out around Naughty Dog this week, Lewis. And FYI, I'm just going to say this right at the top, right here. This is going to be a very PlayStation heavy show, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know why, but a whole bunch of PlayStation stuff just happens to have dropped all at the one time. But also, it's partly because PlayStation just can't seem to keep their shit together without leaking stuff all over the place. So, yeah, sorry Xbox gamers. But back to Naughty Dog. First, it seems as though a QA tester has put on their LinkedIn profile that they are working on 1, an unannounced remake, and 2, an unannounced multiplayer game. Now, Bloomberg first reported on a Last of Us remake back in April, which this almost certainly is in my head, Lewis. Naughty Dog have also been hiring for their quote-unquote first standalone multiplayer game for some time now, which is widely speculated to be the rumoured Last of Us Part 2 multiplayer, which seems to have expanded from basically being DLC for the main game into being its own thing. Industry insider Tom Henderson, no relation, has also said that Naughty Dog were working on The Last of Us Part 2 Director's Cut as well, similar to the Ghost of Tsushima Director's Cut and the Death Stranding Director's Cut that we have already had. And co-president Neil Druckmann himself has said that the studio is working on multiple projects. Basically, Lewis, my point here is that they seem to have globbed onto this poor man's LinkedIn post to tell us something that we already knew. I feel quite bad for this dude, I've got to say, Lewis. However, it is nice to know that at least the remake and the multiplayer are all but confirmed at this point in my mind anyway. It's sort of the no smoke without fire factor, and there seems to be like an unbelievable amount of smoke around these two things. So
yeah. Absolutely. I mean, the multiplayer Last of Us Part 2 thing, I think basically has been confirmed by them in the past. It's no secret that really it's just not very clear what it was going to be. As you say, was it ever meant to come with the game? Was it originally meant as DLC soon to follow? Or is it actually, as we're seeing now, 2 years down the line, is it just going to drop as its own thing? But the Last of Us remake, I guess, is the kind of most exciting, well, that depends on your viewpoint, I suppose, but the most interesting part of the news here, because that was rumoured and it sparked a lot of debate about whether it was actually needed, or, and at that point, I guess you're still wondering, will it actually happen? But this seems to more or less confirm it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I agree with you on both points. I do think that this multiplayer is going to have to be its own thing at this point, though, I've got to say. But yeah, this remake, whether you want it or not, I think it's definitely coming. But Lewis, the second piece of Naughty Dog news I think is a bit more interesting, or at least a bit more surprising, I will say that. A recruiter for Naughty Dog also made a LinkedIn post, I don't know what the hell is happening over at LinkedIn Naughty Dog, I have to say, that they were scouting for talent at all levels, and also said that it was special being able to build future teams not only for new titles but for the legacy of Uncharted, which to me very much seems to imply that Naughty Dog are planning something to do with Uncharted. Now, is that going to be another remake? Is that going to be another spin-off? I have absolutely no idea. But what's your take here on that?
I mean, it surely can't be another remake. What is there left to do? They've already done...
Oh, I don't know, the PSP games or something?
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Well, actually, could well be that. I mean, this could, again, be about upgrading some of those games for a new subscription service, potentially. You know, just polishing things that are a wee bit older, or, yeah, getting the handheld games up to scratch. But I don't think that Sony are done with Uncharted. I kind of thought Naughty Dog might be, and that things might shift around and that it would end up at another studio, but maybe it will just be like a Lost Legacy length type thing if they are going to continue the series. I think it's too soon to embark on either another Nathan Drake game or another kind of full reboot of the franchise with a different lead character and another sort of like 25-hour epic, you know?
Well, it must have been quite a while since Uncharted 4 now. I mean, that was out way before
Last of Us Part 2. It's about 6 years. So it came out in 2016. So.
I mean, it probably is time if you were going to do another one. Like, do we really need or want, another Nathan Drake Uncharted game? I'm sure some people do, but I mean, I certainly don't.
Nah, it's time to
It'll be
move
very,
on.
very interesting to see where this goes. I think that there's a very interesting topic of the week somewhere down the line, Lewis, about can we just let things die? Can we just let video games die? Can we just tell a 3-part or 4-part or however many spin-off games included story of Nathan Drake and then stop making that? Because I think all the business people say no and all the creative people say, well, actually I want to do something else now.
Yeah.
Alright, let's news item number 3, and sticking with Uncharted, the Uncharted Legacy of Thieves PC date has leaked by Epic of all people. Again, this is just the weird things that happen to Sony. It seems to be that everything leaks all the time, whether it be on LinkedIn or whether it be by their enormous partners who they have invested in. They seem to have listed the date as the 20th of June on the Epic Games Store. The game will also be coming to Steam as well. But this brings me on to PlayStation's PC strategy, Lewis, which in my mind is clearly expanding. They obviously bought the port specialist company Nexus in July last year. They've obviously ported Horizon Zero Dawn, Days Gone, God of War, and now the Uncharted Legacy of Thieves collection onto PC already. It has also been confirmed this week that PlayStation are seeking a senior director to lead their PC planning. Their responsibilities will include the strategy and commercial activity within global channel sales, and will deliver a single optimized PC sales growth and commercial plan, which business words. But basically they're getting someone in to lead the charge here, it sounds like, Liz. This is obviously an area that PlayStation want to grow into, Liz. It's something that they've been missing out on for a long time, frankly. It's ridiculous it's taken them this long to get on a PC, but now they're going at it full steam ahead. What are your thoughts on this? What do you think is going to be the next PC port? Because really, to me, it's coming down to when are we seeing The Last of Us on there?
Yeah, I mean, thinking about what we were just talking about around Naughty Dog, I mean, maybe that is what is going on here. Maybe those, the original Last of Us game is being tidied up for a all singing, all dancing PC release, because it feels like there's two different types of games that Sony can really build on to put onto PC at the moment. They've got some of their bigger open world games like Horizon. They obviously had Days Gone go out, Death Stranding ended up on PC, though technically not through them in the end. Or there's their big kind of cinematic showpieces like God of War and maybe The Last of Us. It seems odd that they wouldn't have done The Last of Us on PC yet, given that it's kind of PlayStation's flagship franchise, would we say now? In one sense, certainly, I think it is.
I mean, certainly one of them.
Yeah, up there with, God of War. I think critically speaking, it probably is their flagship, but just whether it has a broad enough audience given the kind of content. So yeah, I would assume that is coming soon. Maybe you're going to get a Part 1 remake alongside a Part 2 Director's Cut and the multiplayer coming to PC and PS5 at the same time. You would certainly think that they'll want to get any multiplayer games onto PC, right? So if that is coming,
sure,
then maybe that. And I guess in that vein, the other game that seems like an obvious contender is Ghost of Tsushima, partly because it fulfills that open world side of things, and also because of all the Legends stuff that they put out afterwards. There's the potential there for multiplayer too. So you can see the road ahead of PlayStation. There's only so many games that they're going to do this with, and then it becomes, what's the next phase of their strategy? What is the acquisitions that they've been doing? What are they adding to this strategy going forward? Are we going to start to see day and date games coming to PC?
Well, that was the next big question I was going to ask you, Lewis. Do you think the more that PlayStation are focusing on getting these games to PC, that we see a reduced time between the game's initial launch on PlayStation and whenever it turns up on PC? And do you think we ever get to the point where the launch of the game on PS5 is the same date as the launch on PC? They both come there day one, do you know what I mean?
I've still always thought that was fairly unlikely to happen.
I would agree, to be honest.
It's because of that need to sell console units. We've always looked at this and thought this is about basically extending the tail of these game releases. You can add it to another platform and get another few million sales a couple of years after it's been at its hottest on console. But I don't know. Part of me does think, with the Bungie acquisition, they're buying up these multiplayer studios, they're buying up these PC studios. You do start to look at it and think, well, actually, anything in that vein, I don't see why you wouldn't want to put it on PC immediately if the economics behind the game are actually more about microtransactions or battle passes and subscriptions and that kind of thing. Then you probably do just put it out on PC at the same time, especially given that you still can't get your fucking hands on a PS5, You gotta make their money somewhere if they can't sell the units.
In terms of things coming to PC though, I still think that Bloodborne is a long shot just because it's very old. I do think that if we dare to dream the Bluepoint are remastering Bloodborne, then that would come to PC, not the original version. However, I don't think that Spider-Man is going to be there because I think you have to get Disney on side, and that's a whole kettle of fish that I'm not sure that they're actually going to do. I would say that Spider-Man is probably the least likely, but even things like Ratchet and Clank and stuff like that, there's no reason for them not to be on PC 6 months, a year down the line after they've been in console, So yeah, I would like to see them expand this, and there's no reason for them not to, basically, and there's not been any reason for them not to for years and years and years. They've just finally got around to bloody doing it.
Yeah, it does make you ask the question though, like, what has changed changed? What numbers have Sony looked at and thought, we need to do things in the polar opposite way from what we've basically always done and always said we would do? Because now it does seem like they're accelerating it so clearly. They're seeing, dollar signs here, and that's...
Yeah.
I mean, I was thinking before about something like Ratchet and Clank. Like, does that fit? Is there a market for that on PC that wouldn't have already picked it up on PlayStation? But they're just basically always will. As long as your development costs for porting it aren't massive, there's always going to be an economic reason to do it.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago when Sean Layden and John Katira and like Shuhei all sort of stepped down or moved away from the company, whatever, and there was a sort of wee bit of a shake-up at the top of PlayStation, and Jim Ryan came in and Herman Hulst and whatever, and all these people are now in charge. I think it's sort of come with that, or that's certainly where I'm seeing it from, is that these people have now went, well, actually this is pretty stupid that we're not putting it on PC. Everyone seems to want this and we can make more money doing it, so what's the harm? Yeah. You know what I mean? Alright, listen, news item number 4. Ubisoft is apparently drawing quote-unquote buyout interest, according to Bloomberg. Apparently, several private equity firms, including Blackstone Inc. and KKR Co., which as far as I can work out are two of the biggest private equity firms in the world, are currently studying Ubisoft. I also read somewhere, and take this with a pinch of salt because I cannot find this quote and it was annoying me and I spent an inordinate amount of time looking for it, Liz. But I also read that Ubisoft were auditing various parts of their business basically to streamline things and to trim the fat. Something that a business that was looking to be purchased might want to do, They have also, as of today, officially shut down 90 online services for their various games dating back to the PS2 era, if you can believe it.
Wow.
Yeah, unbelievable. It's sort of stunning that they still were available, or they still have online servers dedicated to something that old, to be honest. But yeah, I mean, they've shut down 90 online gaming services. Unbelievable. Shares of Ubisoft have fallen by 41% in the Paris stock market over the past year, largely because of accusations of misconduct and harassment, the stagnation of the flagship Assassin's Creed franchise, staples like Watch Dogs and Far Cry failing to make significant industry impact compared to its competitors, failure to capitalise on industry trends like free-to-play games and battle royales, which leads to failures like Hyperscape and Riders Republic, uncertainty around other big projects like Beyond Good and Evil 2 and Skull and Bones, which I don't think we're ever going to see, to be honest with you, and betting big on blockchain and NFTs, only to be lambasted by the press and players alike. However, the stock price shot up by 11% when it was claimed that they were attracting takeover interest, which I think tells you all you need to know about what the shareholders are probably thinking, Lewis. Now, I will say, I'm not the biggest fan of Ubisoft, Lewis. I dare say that you aren't either. However, I think that if they were sold to a private equity firm, that would be a very bad sign. I think that that would basically spell the end of Ubisoft as we know them, which would be very sad because they do hold some of the most important and biggest video game property in the world in reality. And I think what a lot of private equity firms do is they come in, strip things down to their bare bones and try and sell again, basically, which would probably mean that a lot of people would lose their job as well, which would be a very, very sad thing. No one wants to see that. Forbes did speculate, however, that the private equity firm could be looking for a quick flip, e.g. come in, don't quite strip it down to the bones, but strip it down a little bit, and then sell it on to an actual gaming company, and then you see Microsoft and Sony step up, I'm sure. But speaking of Sony, again, and I know that this has just turned into a PlayStation podcast list, but we were speaking last week about how there was rumours of a major Sony acquisition. And I know that we were largely thinking along the lines of it's going to be Japanese and it's going to be big. But does Ubisoft make a lot of sense here?
That's a big question. I would have thought before everything that you just said there that Ubisoft would have been too big for PlayStation to take on, quite frankly. I would have been pricing them closer to the... Yeah, I would have been looking at that as something closer to the Bethesda deal for Xbox than the kinds of deals that PlayStation have been making up to this point, which have been fractions of that.
Remind me, Lewis, what was the Bethesda deal again?
$7 billion, I believe.
Well, Ubisoft are valued at $5.2 billion at their current market share. So there would be quite a chunk less than Bethesda now, is what I would say, because of the various issues that have happened with Ubisoft over the years. But you're right. I mean, not that long ago, they would have been well above Bethesda, probably.
Yeah, and that still feels like a lot of money for Sony to be paying out for someone. So it may not be that Sony are about to swoop in and get them, but as you've said about a few things tonight, like no smoke without fire, that all the signs here are pointing towards some kind of buyout. And I totally agree with you. Like, I'm not a Ubisoft fan, and as you rattled off that list of sort of errors that they've made recently, essentially,
I think that list could have went on less if I'm
that's
totally
it.
honest.
Yeah, you know, I've said before, we've had conversations even on the podcast before about how long it's been since I've played a Ubisoft game and how unappealing I basically find most of the things that they do, and that's just the actual gaming side. And then when you throw in the microtransactions and the NFTs and the work, you know, the sexual misconduct stuff, all of this, it builds a picture of a company that could really, really use freshening up and a bit of a shake-up. But as a private equity firm, the right one to do that, I don't know.
Absolutely not.
I literally,
Absolutely not.
I don't know enough about how these people operate, but it doesn't sound good, private equity. And even that idea that they would come and kind of essentially asset strip it or like make it a leaner business and then sell it on Microsoft or Sony. You would like to hope that they wouldn't want to buy a company that had lost swathes of its staff and that had gone through this pretty horrible experience, you know, that instead they would see the value in them now. But obviously that's just not how capitalism works, so they're not going to do that if there's an option to buy it cheaper, you know?
Well, that's it. I mean, I don't think that being bought by someone like that is necessarily off the table, but yeah, it does seem as though these private equity firms are in the driver's seat if something were to happen. It does have to be said that there's no major talks happening right now or anything like that, but it does seem as though these private equity firms are looking, and frankly, it sounds like Ubisoft are looking to sell as well. Mm-hmm. All right, Lewis, finish off as we always do with a couple of shout-outs. Shout-out number 1, PlayStation are officially bringing VRR support to the PlayStation 5 this week. This has been a long-promised feature for the PlayStation 5 and something that I believe the Series X had on day one. For those that don't know, VRR, or variable refresh rate, basically syncs the PlayStation 5's graphical output to the refresh rate of a compatible TV. And if that means as little to you as it does to me, it basically just means that you're getting sharper visuals, you're getting less artifacting, and you are getting fewer performance drops, all of which are good. However, you will need a TV which supports HDMI 2.1 and is VRR compatible, which the last time I looked were quite expensive, but they are coming down in price, ladies and gentlemen. Some games which already support VRR include Deathloop, Tiny Tina's Wonderland, Call of Duty Vanguard, Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War, the Spider-Man Remaster, Spider-Man Miles Morales, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, and Destiny 2. There are even options in the settings to apply VRR to unsupported games, which could also improve your visuals. VRR really is one of the true sort of next-gen console features. You know, it's a sort of step up from anything that we could have possibly thought of in the last generation or when that was launching, certainly, anyway. And it's taken all this time for PlayStation just to catch up, Liz. But as a man who I strongly suspect couldn't give a fuck about VRR, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I just find all of these things kind of bizarre little buzzwords that it's near impossible for the layman to actually kind of see any difference as they're playing.
It makes the visuals better. You don't need to worry about it beyond that.
Sure, but like, was Spider-Man Miles Morales one of the games that you said there that has it?
Sure.
That game looks fucking incredible. I can't even begin to imagine how you could make that look better in a way that I would actually notice, you know? That is just me. I accept that some people are mad into this, and I obviously am not denying that it's there. Like, I'm sure Digital Foundry will do a video and explain it all, and it'll be scientifically proven to do something. But I just find that I said earlier, I'm putting my TV in to get repaired. A bunch of the LED lights have basically burnt out, and half the screen is kind of blue instead of white if you're projecting white light through it. I never even noticed. Someone else had to point it out to me. So.
I'm glad that you told that story and not me, because I would have told it quite a lot more unflattering. But yes, Lewis didn't even notice he was playing games on a broken TV for quite a long time.
Like, I mean, I had no idea how long it's been, but you know, the guy who I'm getting to fix it told me that it's very common and that people tend not to notice. So
aye, he's taking your money off you though, isn't he?
Well, possibly, yeah. Until I put on a white screen on YouTube, I was not sure about it. So VRR, you know, come ahead, let me see what you got, because I don't know if I can tell.
Alright, shout out number 2. PlayStation have set up a new game preservation team. This is frankly fucking excellent news, Lewis, I have to say. We have said many, many, many times on this podcast that PlayStation have been absolutely terrible at preserving their video games, so this is a welcome thing to hear, I would say. Garrett Friedley has joined PlayStation, and he has made a post on LinkedIn. You guessed it. I've never known LinkedIn to feature so heavily on a podcast, Lewis, but here we are again with a LinkedIn post in which he claims that he is one of the initial hires for a newly created preservation team. PlayStation obviously got in a lot of hot water last year when they announced that they would be closing the PS3, Vita and PSP stores, something that got a huge amount of backlash and made them U-turn, at least on the PS3 and Vita stores, but the PSP store did still close. But now, Lewis, PlayStation are looking to make money from their back catalogue with the PS Plus subscriptions, and now they seem to care a lot more about it. And now I don't know if that's me being very cynical, but I am glad to see that they are preserving their history, because I genuinely think that it's important, and I genuinely think that all games publishers across the industry need to dedicate more money, more manpower and more time to preserving these sorts of things. So I'm glad to see that PlayStation are starting a department specifically dedicated to it.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree with that. It's really time that PlayStation got on board with this. They've got such a storied back catalogue. Why haven't they been doing it up till now? I guess that's a conversation for another time, but great to see them do this. I think, yeah, if other publishers and other developers don't want to do this, or don't have the money or the time or whatever to dedicate to it, or, you know, set up a team themselves, there should be some kind of external body that can start to do this, because, yeah, we are in danger of losing kind of quote-unquote precious pieces of work here that could be, you know, valuable in all sorts of ways, culturally valuable, but also valuable to the future of the industry in terms of helping people learn and all that kind of thing. So good to see them get on board with it. Good luck to this guy if he's leading the team or just part of it. You know, there's a lot of back catalogue there to be taking a look at, so let's hope we start to see some fruits of the labour in the not too distant future.
Yeah, definitely, man. Alright, let's shout out number 3. A former unnamed worker is alleging that Nintendo of America and the hiring company Aston Carter have violated their legal protected rights to unionise. This comes from Steve Totillo over at Axios. The complaint, which was sent to the National Labour Relations Board, or the NLRB, alleges that Nintendo of America and Aston Carter used concerted activities and coercive actions against their workers, interfering with their right to organise. Basically, union busting. Nintendo have since made this statement regarding the allegations.
We are aware of the claim, which was filed with the National Labour Relations Board by a contractor who was previously terminated for the disclosure of confidential information and for no other reason. Nintendo is not aware of any attempts to unionise or related activity and intends to cooperate with the investigation conducted by the NLRB. Nintendo is fully committed to providing a welcoming and supportive work environment for all of our employees and contractors. We take matters of employment very seriously.
Kotaku have since claimed that their sources have said that the leaked information by this contractor would normally have resulted on a slap in the wrist at best. Like, it really wasn't a big deal according to them, and it certainly wasn't a dismissal. So all of this is actually a bit murky, to be honest, right now. The allegations themselves are actually very vague. So we'll have to see what comes out of this investigation, or if anyone else comes forward with additional information, and just to see if this develops in any capacity. But it is definitely something worth keeping your eye on. I will say that Kotaku article that I was referencing there is a fantastic piece of journalism. I would highly recommend anyone go and read it. Links as always over in the show notes at PlayerStoo.com. I will say that it largely focuses on how badly contracted staff are treated in Nintendo of America, but I would argue as well that that is probably true across the industry, and is something that we definitely have to look into changing. But a very good read list. All of this, not great.
Definitely not great, no. Worth raising, even though we don't know too much about it yet. Another potential union busting tactic happening in the games industry, and even if not that, just some complaints about how staff are treated in the workplace by these major publishers and major developers. You don't like to see it. I hope that this gets cleared up and we get a bit more detail as the weeks go forward. But yeah, just everyone be better. Be better employers. All
be better.
Treat people with respect.
Absolutely. Alright, listen, final shout out number 4. The BBC have announced their first ever gaming proms this year. For those that don't know, the proms are a season of classical music that's held every year, so far as I can work out. It actually dates back to 1895, unbelievably, and is usually held over the summer at the Royal Albert Hall. But Proms 21 this year, on August the 1st, will be titled Gaming Proms from 8-Bit to Infinity, which I mean, we could do better work with the title, but that's neither here nor there. They confirmed the music that will be getting played here is from Battlefield 2042, from Dear Esther, from Kingdom Hearts, and from Shadow of the Colossus, with more to be confirmed. I know that the vast majority of people here probably don't care about classical music, probably don't even care about a concert or video game music, to be totally honest with you. It's not really something for me either. But stuff like this happening here is pretty cool. Like, you hear about stuff like this, these big concerts happening in America or in Japan, like sort of celebrating video game music, and it's just not something that I've ever really heard of happening here. Certainly not at the Proms, which is culturally quite a significant thing, really, and by far the biggest classical music event that happens in this country. So I don't know, I just thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's quite an interesting little phenomenon, this, because as you say, the BBC Proms are enormous and have been going for, you know, whatever you said, a couple of centuries basically. They are really significant and they do have a particular audience. And what I find really interesting about this is this has made the national news today, really. I saw it being reported in The Guardian as well. It's been, you know, I've seen them running their ads for it. There's no reason that they would do this except if they thought that they were going to find a new and different audience for the Proms and trying to diversify that. And so it's another example, like we've been seeing in other ways with like film and TV recently, of these other art forms understanding the power and the draw that video games have right now and kind of tapping into that. I hadn't actually read the list of games and game music that are being featured there, and it's quite a broad mix. Like, I kind of thought it might just be like, you know, the Mario theme song done with a brass band type thing, but, you know, to have like Shadow of the Colossus in there, to have Dear Esther in there, I mean, maybe they've been collaborating with like BAFTA games or something, looking at what they know about good video game soundtracks, because hard to imagine who's sat in the Proms office and knows this stuff. But I think, yeah, it's really cool. It will be on TV for people in the UK, so you will be able to see it whenever it comes around in the summer. So maybe worth checking out and just seeing what kind of reaction it gets. Yeah,
definitely. I genuinely hope it goes well. Again, I know that some people out there are really into like listening to video game soundtracks and stuff like that. I'm not that guy. I'm really not. I do like video game music within the context of the game, but I've never really been drawn to anything like this. But just the fact that it's happening here and it's at the BBC Proms, that's kind of wild, to be honest. All right, Liz, I think it's time for a beer, and then we'll be back for Topic of the Week. And we are back for Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is preserving PlayStation's history, Luce. The whole show has been about PlayStation. Why not make Topic of the Week about PlayStation as well? I have to say, if anyone's listening to this as their first PlayerStoo podcast, it's not always like this, I swear to God. Me and Luce are PlayStation boys, but it's not always like this.
No, there's usually a bit of other news, but yeah, it's been a PlayStation heavy one this week. And yeah, because of that game preservation team news that we were discussing earlier, this has finally been created within PlayStation, and it feels sort of well-timed, I guess you would say, with alongside the plans for the new PlayStation Plus subscription offerings. You know, this idea that there's going to be a back catalogue of games to be accessed there. Those two bits come together quite nicely and could hopefully point to some more of Sony's kind of illustrious back catalogue being preserved and made available to play than we kind of previously thought, or certainly more than I previously thought. That might not be the case, but even if not, it's still great to know that some of the most important games, and hopefully as well some of the more goofy games that they've done over the years, will be kept available, made available, whether that's just for devs to learn from, or maybe for future museums to be able to celebrate the early days of this industry, which is like completely taken over the world at this point, but was not necessarily destined to do that. And that goes back to the whole conversation about why game preservation is important in the first place. So what I kind of wanted to do this week, just keeping it loose and fun, was to kind of go through the 4 prior generations of PlayStation and just kind of basically pick a game that we would want that preservation team to save or potentially to make available on PlayStation Plus as a way of illustrating PlayStation's history or preserving PlayStation's story over the last, what are we now, 3 decades, I suppose. But you can interpret that in any old way, really, Mark. Like, what is important to PlayStation? Is it just the 4 best games? Is it games that have something interesting to say about that point in time or the industry at that moment? So, yeah, starting with PS1, the console that helped make console gaming mainstream and essentially pushed us all into the 3D gaming world that we know and love today, obviously alongside the N64. Nintendo fans, don't attack. But, yeah, it's the console that kind of started home console gaming to the greatest extent, I think we could safely say now. PS1.
Well, Lewis, if you're asking me what the best game on PS1 is, for me it's Metal Gear Solid, still comfortably. And I would also probably choose to save that, to be honest. Again, I'm sure that you were probably expecting me to say this for all the reasons which I'm about to say. I think that Metal Gear Solid is, I mean, it's inarguably one of the most important video games ever made as far as I'm concerned. It showed that you could do things with video games that no one had done before, you know what I mean? You could present it like the piece of art that it is, you know what I mean? You can present it almost movie-like and tell a story that is incredibly complex and enthralling in a way that you couldn't do before, which interestingly you bring up the 3D graphics, because I do think that goes a long way in making it feel that way, do you know what I mean? But yeah, for me, definitely Metal Gear Solid. To be clear, we're not sticking to PlayStation published, right? This is a valid choice.
yeah. I think particularly for the PS1, there's a grey area in a lot of what was out on that system about what was exclusive and what just wasn't available on other consoles, because there weren't really other consoles that could do the same stuff. So I think you can say whatever you want for this. It's fast and loose. I guess we're talking what represents PlayStation's history for us.
I mean, I think that Metal Gear Solid 1 specifically is inescapably linked to that console, because that's the only place that you can play it, and it was such an important game, do you know what I mean? And the same could be said for Final Fantasy VII, for me as well, I think. But don't get me wrong, I mean, you were just talking to me a little bit about the sort of concept for this topic of the week just before we started here, and you mentioned like Crash Bandicoot, and I was immediately like, oh well, Spyro as well. I mean, they're also inextricably linked to this console. I mean, there was so much from that console that was just incredibly important and just shaped a lot of what was to come, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. I think you're bang on with that as well. Another game in that vein that I was thinking about was Tomb Raider, just that it represented not only something major for PlayStation, but just a kind of cultural moment was kind of encapsulated by Lara Croft. You know, she was on the cover of like lads mags and everything back in the 90s, which is a funny time to think back to, really. But
are they still around? Surely not. Hopefully not.
I mean, I guess the internet has made them not relevant, but anyway. But yeah, there's some others there that I thought were interesting, just things like Parappa the Rapper, which is kind of a big PlayStation icon in certain ways. Ape Escape, for similar reasons, that it was sort of the first game that had, or that required the analog stick. You know, we might not have got that right away at that point on the handset without Ape Escape, although as you said, they were no doubt developing other things at the same time. One game not published by Sony but that I played on PS1 and that I think is an interesting example, and we've actually mentioned it recently, was Soul Reaver Legacy of Kain, which I mentioned only, I know that's a bit of a deep cut and that's partly like personal, because it's one of the only like PS1 games that I've really thought I would love to go back and play all the way through that today, you know. But then obviously the Tekken games, Resident Evil 1 in particular really sticks out. You know, Silent Hill on PS1 as well. There's tons of stuff there. But you know, if we were saying that all of these games are being deleted and only one could be saved, it would definitely be Metal Gear Solid. So no surprises there, really.
No, probably not. Probably quite predictable, really.
And then for the PS2, the highest selling console of all time, with a library of enormous game changers, probably the era as well that most people would want to see quite heavily preserved, I think.
I would have thought so, yeah. I mean, honestly, if you're asking me right now, I think that the game that I would choose personally would be Shadow of the Colossus, because again, it is one of my favourite games ever. However, if you're asking me what game to me really represented this era, for me, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas is the one. Yeah. That is the one that represented this era for me.
Yeah, I thought about GTA 3 for the same reason, that it sort of
I will concede that GTA 3 is a more significant game. I would also argue potentially that Vice City is a better game, but I think as like a cultural phenomenon that happened at the time, San Andreas was everywhere when that came out, man. That really cemented like GTA as like this totemic, inescapable monster in the video games industry, I think.
Yeah, absolutely, it did. I guess my kind of top pick, again, from the more personal slant, I thought about Shadow of the Colossus definitely, but then I was like, well, it's been re-released on PS4, or remade for PS4, so I don't need to pick it here. But in the same vein, I would have gone for Ico here, partly again because it's not easy to play anymore. It's not been remastered or remade. I think it came out as a collection with Shadow of the Colossus on PS3, but hasn't been playable kind of since then.
Yeah,
I think I said this roughly a week or two ago about Elden Ring, that it's got elements of that same kind of that Team Ico feel about it that both Ico and Shadow of the Colossus have, right? That sort of empty, fallen world that I think Ico just has in spades. It's so atmospheric. It's a gorgeous game, and that would be something that would be really worth rescuing from that era and getting it in more people's hands today, because I think it will still hold up as a really phenomenal, beautiful game.
Oh, it definitely will. And I cannot let the PS2 go by without mentioning Snake Eater List, which
is
just an outstandingly great game as well. However, I think think we can only preserve one Metal Gear Solid game, and we both picked Metal Gear 1, so...
And yeah, so then on to the PS3, which is maybe a bit of a low point for PlayStation overall, but still a system that pushed boundaries and definitely, I guess, alongside the Xbox 360, brought multiplayer games into the homes of millions of PlayStation players. That has changed the industry and everything about it as well. So not insignificant games, but I thought a slightly weaker list here. I was finding it hard to pick a game that I thought was the one worth saving here.
Oh, I wasn't. For me, this was very, very clear cut. For me, this is The Last of Us, comfortably.
Yeah.
That totally defines this era for PlayStation for me, because as you said, I mean, a low point, the launch of the PS3 was a shambles as well. No, PlayStation did bring it back around again towards the end, and how they done that is how they are currently succeeding with these incredible first party games. And I don't think anything really represents that as well as The Last of Us, the first Last of Us game. Don't get me wrong, it probably started with Uncharted in reality, but I think that The Last of Us was so incredible. The first one was just so fantastic. It couldn't not be that for me.
Yeah, I think you're probably right there. I guess the reason that I was saying it's difficult to pick is because, in my head at least, that era of PlayStation is quite heavily represented by games like Resistance and the kind of latter Killzone games, which also ties in with the point that I just fell away from gaming a bit, and so it's not an era I really... I mean, I was going to say it's not an era I really want to see, come onto the PlayStation Plus collection. It's not something that I imagine I'm going to explore to any great extent, but at the same time, it is the kind of period I missed out on, and so there's quite a lot of games here that I was looking at thinking, well, I don't really know these. I've not played a lot of them to any great extent, but having said all that and waffled around, there is kind of only... There's two games, two series, both from Naughty Dog, that I think encapsulate everything that PlayStation 3 was, and also particularly in the case of The Last of Us, that really set up everything that PlayStation was about to become. I think everything that we'll talk about in a wee minute around the PS4, all the innovations that Sony brings to the table at that point when it re-establishes its dominance, kind of come through The Last of Us. Imagine The Last of Us hadn't been a success. The whole focus on really cinematic narrative storytelling in games, that balance of action gameplay and atmosphere, all of those things are built by The Last of Us, and kind of, I don't know that the generation that followed it would have been what it was had they not learned something through making that game, and Uncharted to a slightly lesser extent. But to me, it's both of those, and The Last of Us is the standout there, so that's how I would be going. But I mean, we've not even mentioned the indies there that launched on PlayStation.
Well, you've taken the words straight out of my mouth, Lewis. We can't not mention Journey here. Exactly. I mean, this is when the indie took off, really. I mean, this is when we had the ability to download games easily. Do you know what I mean? We didn't have to go to a shop to buy them. More importantly, a dev didn't need a publisher to pay a huge amount of money to get discs burnt and boxes made and cover art made. They just had to put it up in the PlayStation Store, and I think Journey really encapsulates that moment as well. That was actually published by PlayStation, I believe, and I think it was also helped made by Santa Monica Studios. I think that was one of those ones, which is sort of weird to think about now. Yeah. But yeah, Journey went on to win loads of awards, is widely regarded as one of the greatest indie games of all time, if not one of the greatest games of all time. So yeah, an honourable mention to that, and the dawn of the indie game, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a moment absolutely worth preserving in this sort of future museum of PlayStation and of gaming generally, that when that game came out, and we still see it resonating even as recently as the Pathless that we were just talking about a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then on to the daddy itself, the PS4, another absolute colossus with probably, I would say, and I'm sure you'll agree with this, but probably the strongest lineup of Sony-made games ever, probably the strongest lineup of PS-exclusive games ever, possibly the best lineup of games generally speaking, but Nintendo might argue with that in particular with some of their
I think Nintendo would have something to say about that, mate. Yeah.
I think there's a few obvious standouts here, but I'm really interested to see what direction you go. I guess for this one, I'm imagining it will be a PS published game, just because at this point they had such a steady output, but obviously go in any direction.
It will be, if we're talking PlayStation, like defining this period of PlayStation games, you know what I mean? Don't get me wrong, like even since the last generation, like you're right, that was the dawn of multiplayer, but because Xbox were so dominant then, I associate so many of those multiplayer games with Xbox, because everybody was on Xbox, not PlayStation, And as we were talking about with the dawn of The Last of Us and PlayStation really emphasising single-player, cinematic, narrative-driven games, I mean, does it get any better than God of War 2018? Does it get any better than that? I think it remains one of the best games ever made. I think it totally epitomises what PlayStation were going for at this time, which, as we said, was basically an extension of the original The Last of Us game, and everything about God of War is sensational as far as I'm concerned, so it would definitely be that for me.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there as well. Like, God of War does encapsulate everything that Sony has become, and we briefly were talking earlier about like what is PlayStation's flagship game these days, and to me it's a straight shot between God of War and the Last of Us series. You know, it probably just depends on what age you are and how much you like horror stuff, depending on which way you're going to go in that argument. I guess for me, yeah, there's some other massive standouts there. One, obviously, that we've both talked about endlessly would be Bloodborne, that it represents not something so much about PlayStation, I suppose, but something about where gaming has gone in the last few years, which is this huge push towards Souls games.
Miyazaki dominated the world.
Exactly, and has kind of really created a genre from nothing over the course of the Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and now Elden Ring series. We need to come up with a snappy title for all of that now, because Soulsborne doesn't really fit
I think
anymore.
we just need to stick with Soulsborne and go, yeah, Elden Ring, we're actually
and all the others.
I know, yeah.
But so I think that's a really honourable shout for, again, if you were putting together an exhibit of gaming history and trying to select a PlayStation game that could represent that, I think Bloodborne would be a fine example. But yeah, God of War 2018 and The Last of Us Part 2 are still standouts there in terms of pushing the whole industry forward, the genre of storytelling that gaming can provide. I think that they're important games and will remain seen as that for hopefully decades to come.
I also have to give an honourable mention here to the Spider-Man games as well, particularly the rebooted ones, because we're talking about these games, God of War and The Last of Us, but see, if your first console is the PS4, I reckon one of the first games you'll have played and will have loved are those Spider-Man games.
Absolutely,
do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
For a different generation, and rightfully so, because they are fucking brilliant.
Yeah, 100%. And Spider-Man 2 on the PS2 would have been a top pick for me for the same reason.
Incredible game as well. Absolutely incredible game.
They introduce so much about kind of movement and traversal that's become so important in games as well. So absolutely. I mean, yeah, this is a list given by people who have lived through all four stages of this history and have been deeply involved in it and grown up with it. And so we're picking the kind of most adult games by the end, I suppose, and back in Metal Gear Solid days, to be honest.
Yeah,
but
definitely too young to be playing them, really.
Yeah. But if you are a kid or you're a bit younger than us and you come into these generations at different points, you know, how much love did people have for Jak and Daxter, which was just not something that we were really into as kids.
Yeah,
but
didn't really into.
You know, and there'll be that for each generation. So everyone would cut PlayStation's story in different ways, and that's why it's so important that this preservation stuff happens, and hopefully that a lot of these games get put onto the new PS Plus subscription service, because there's just like a wealth of stories and of games there and of revolutions in gaming that it'll be exciting to be able to explore if they do it properly and really live up to what that could be.
Yeah, man, definitely, 100%. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll have to call it a day there. I'd like to remind everyone that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media, that is Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, that really, really, really helps us out. There's a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, that just helps us out even more. And thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. It genuinely does mean a lot. I'd like to remind everyone that our play-along game for this month is the Artful Escape. Have you started playing it yet?
I have not, no, but now that I'm having to hand over my TV and I will be playing this on my laptop, it is going to be the next thing that I play.
Literally had to get rid of his TV to play it, ladies and gentlemen. There we go. No, very excited to play this as well. I'm really looking forward to a discussion on this one, I've got to say. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.